Number one, we need to evaluate the integral of secant tangent. So we need to take the antiderivative. What is the antiderivative of secant tangent? It is just secant of x evaluated from 0 to pi over 3. Look, here's the deal. You need to maybe have that memorized, but if you don't have it memorized, when it comes down to things, there's probably going to be a question on the AP exam relating to this. It's not going to say what's the derivative of secant more than likely. It'll say what's the integral of secant tangent. So if you don't have that memorized, you have to figure out a way to do that. So how could you know that is the answer, or that is the, this is the antiderivative of that? You have to think backwards. So you know basic, they're not going to give you some crazy trick stuff if it's a non-calculator. So it's either going to be sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, or cotangent. You know sine, the derivative of sine, cosine, and tangent, right? So it's one of the other three. Now it looks like secant tangent, let's see, what was the derivative of tangent? Secant squared. So the derivative of cotangent is something like it. Negative cosecant squared. Okay, so that means this is either going to be secant or cosecant. So take the derivative of this. How would you take the derivative to get to that? We don't got that memorized. That's okay. How would you rewrite this in order to take the derivative? 1 over cosine, and then you do what? Quotient rule. So what's the derivative of the top? 0 times the bottom, that's all 0, minus the derivative of the bottom. Negative sine, so this becomes positive sine of x. All over cosine squared x. We could rewrite that as sine over cosine times 1 over cosine, which is tangent times secant. So the derivative of secant is tangent secant, so the integral of secant tangent is secant. Okay? So, but I'm saying, if you don't got it memorized, you've got to have a way to get the answer. All right, so secant of pi over 3 minus secant of 0. What's secant of pi over 3? Because cosine of pi over 3 is 1/2, so it's the reciprocal. So 2, what's the secant of 0? Because the cosine of 0 is 1 and the reciprocal 1 is 1. So the answer is just 1. Number 2, we want the average value. So how do I find average value? I'm not asking for average rate. How would you find average rate?
The slope, the derivative.
No, not derivative. Average rate is what? No. Average rate is f of 6 minus f of 0 over 6 minus 0. Average rate is just the slope of the function, right? Average value is something with the integral. Average value is 1 over 6 minus 0, integral from 0 to 6, of 0.2x squared minus 0.8x minus 1 dx. This should not be a difficult one to take the antiderivative of, right? It should be pretty easy. But you can use your calculator because it is a lot of number crunching. What did you guys get? -1. So you can see it actually doesn't end up being that messy if you did it, okay? Are we okay with this?
Yeah, what was the other one? Average rate? What was that?
Average rate, instantaneous rate is derivative, right?
Yes.
Average rate, well, derivative is a slope at a point. The average rate is the slope between 2 points. So you just find the slope.
Okay.
So you'd say, I guess in this case you do y of 6 minus y of 0 over 6 minus 0.
Oh, yeah.
Does that make sense?